our religion and sexuality discussion event. I'm Megan, I'm the LGBT officer Women's Place for Kent Uni, and on behalf of the LGBT campaign I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'd also like to welcome Kent Islamic Society, Kent Sikh Society and Kent Afro-Caribbean Society to agree in taking part in this event. I'd also like to especially welcome Reverend Stephen Laird, who's Anglican Chaplain and a lecturer in religious studies, and Hanif Leylabi from NUS LGBT. I'd like to finally welcome Matthew Partridge, who's Chair Kent Students and will be our impartial chair for this evening. Just one note, it's just, working together with the faith communities on campus as well as the LGBT group, it's a good way of, getting to know each other's views in a safe space so we can all discuss the issues that occur. I'll now pass on to Matt, and he's going to go through some safe space issues and rules, and hopefully you'll have a fun and respectful evening. Thank you.
Okay, sorry I have to start with being fun police or laying down some rules, but yeah, we want this to be a very thought-provoking, free, intellectual discussion tonight. And we want you to give your honest thoughts and back that up with a reasoned argument and so forth. However, I'm very conscious that I'll be coming down quite hard on any language I deem to be offensive. Not necessarily the message you're trying to get across, but maybe how you do it. So just try and bear that in mind. I hope it doesn't come to it, but if we have to, we'll either ask people to stop contributing or send them out if they're deemed to be upsetting people in how they come across tonight. Okay, so just to go through the format of the evening. I'm going to bring forward a subject or ask the panelists a question, and then I'll ask them in turn to give us their contributions, and then afterwards I'll open it up to the floor for the discussion, and yeah, if everyone's happy with that. And again, yeah, we have to be finished by 8. Okay, so I'll now ask our two panelists to give a quick introduction about themselves and about the society and about where they're coming from tonight, and also why they agreed to participate in tonight's event. So if we start with Hanif.
Hi everyone, thanks very much for inviting me here today. As I said, my name's Hanif. I'm on the NUS LGBT campaign committee. That's a national union of students. Something that we had a lot of discussion around at our conference last year was faith. A lot of that was around circumcision, just to let you know, but a lot of it was actually around quite more issues than that. And since then, we've had quite a lot of discussions with students around the country at different activist training days and events. And it's been a big issue for people, how LGBT students sometimes feel that they either find it hard to reconcile their faith and their sexuality, or they either feel kind of homophobia from the faith group sometimes, or even as well phobia or prejudice against their faith from their LGBT societies. And so we've decided to kind of take that up and do some work to try and make as many safe spaces, as you like, for LGBT students to be able to enjoy the student experience in the way that they see fit, to be able to, express their sexual orientation, gender identity, as well as their faith. That's kind of why I've come here today. So I hope it's a really good meeting, and thanks again.
Hello everybody, I'm Stephen Laird. I'm one of the chaplains here at the university. You've probably seen these things around the place, and I expect some of you are going to the carol service. And the chaplains are here to offer religious support to students and staff at the university. We also have a watching brief to make sure the different religious groups, not just Christian groups, but all the religious groups, feel that they get the support that they need. And we get involved with stuff that goes on in the university to do with religious equality and other kinds of equality and diversity issues. And another thing I do is I teach religious studies here. I actually teach Christianity, specifically biblical studies, and also Islam. But I'm not going to talk about Islam tonight, because it's not my job to speak on behalf of Muslim people, because they must speak with their own voice. Anyway, I agreed to do this because I particularly handle biblical texts as part of my academic specialism. and I'm quite interested in the whole idea about revelation, which is a key thing for religious people, and how you respond to revelation and how you engage with it, particularly to do with things that we are doing and we have to encounter in today's world. So I was interested in taking part from that point of view. And I'm also interested in this whole business about paradox that you get. Well, you get paradox in life. I mean, things happen in life like, well, you know, bad things happen to good people, and sometimes we hurt the people we love the most, and that kind of thing. We live with paradox on a day-to-day basis, and I'm quite interested in how that issue of paradox kind of transfers into religious life, where maybe one thing is taught in your religion, but for one reason or another you want to find an accommodation and think about doing another course of behaviour for a particular reason. Anyway, thanks.
Okay, so with those instructions done, I think we should jump straight into it. Stephen, if we start with you, can you just lay out your own view and maybe the more official view from the Anglican faith on homosexuality in general?
Okay. Right. I think in the Church of England, which is part of the Anglican communion of churches, just to give you the official view, it is an issue which in the last 20 years the Anglican churches have really been struggling over, precisely because of what I said about paradox. On the one hand, Christians, like most religious people, believe in the importance of revelation, so they worry about what the Bible teaches, what Jesus taught, what St. Paul taught, and they're very much aware of that. On the other hand, and this is the other part of the paradox, Christians believe in a loving God, and they also have witnessed, maybe from their own life and experiences, instances where they've seen people fully realised as human beings and, in a sense, reflecting the love of God to one another and in the world around them when they're in gay relationships. So the Anglican churches are struggling to try and see, as it were, which end of the paradox is going to be the one which holds, or whether you can somehow hold both sides. But I think in general there is a feeling that whatever teaching is given out and applied to people who are in a gay relationship or thinking of being in a gay relationship is the same as the teaching you give out to people who are in a heterosexual relationship. So in other words, they'd be looking for, you know, faithfulness and possibly something like marriage, where the relationship was properly recognised by society. But by definition, particularly in the Church of England, it's not a church which is heavy about laying down the rule like a law book. It's always trying to be creative and take into account what's going on in society, how things are being understood, but at the same time, as I said, the paradox is being true to Scripture and Revelation as well.
Thank you. Hanif, any thoughts?
As you might have guessed, I'm reasonably pro-homosexuality, and I think it's really interesting to look at this issue in terms of history. If we actually look through the ages, through the century, sexuality and gender has expressed itself in so many different ways. And far too often we kind of hear that homosexuality is a deviation from the norm, whereas if we look at actually what the norm is in different eras of history, it's been completely different. So in Greek times, in Roman times, in lots of different civilizations, there's been completely different types of sexuality. So for example, older men often had a wife, but they also maybe had a younger male partner as well. A lot of the time, actually right now, not just in the kind of past, but in Pakistan, there's the Hijra kind of community, for example, which is known as the third gender. There's also in Samoa, there's a third gender, for example, where people who are biologically male, but who displace kind of characteristics that are seen as stereotypically female or raised in a stereotypically female way. So there's obviously gender and sexuality is seen completely differently at different times and in different cultures, and so I think it all has to be seen in context. And I think the fundamental kind of moral thing for me has to be, if there is a consenting relationship between two adults, then what was the problem? And I think that really has to be it. So long as there's that consent there, so long as that love is there, or that attraction is there, then that is kind of the basis on a mutually beneficial relationship.
And now I'd like to invite contributions to the floor. Now these can be quite literally your own thoughts, or they can be questions, but just so you're aware, questions will both panelists will have a chance to answer any questions, so it might not be great to just direct it at one member of the panel. Does anybody like to kick us off? Just hands up. Yeah, straight at the back.
No, he just said that it's okay if it's in consenting adults. So what do you mean, like adults? What do you classify as adults? Like homosexuality has to be within concern of adults. You just say that.
Okay, so
Sorry.
do you mean homosexual relationships
Yeah,
directly, or just relationships generally?
Yeah, he's saying like, oh yeah, it's okay as long as it's in consenting adults within the relationship.
Okay, so okay, to both panelists, what would you consider to be a consenting adult in a relationship, relationship?
Well, I'd say you obey the law of the land.
Okay. Yeah.
I think the concept again of an adult has been different in different times in history. So, in a few hundred years ago, people might have got married younger and maybe had relationships younger. At this time in our society, at the minute, the law says that 16 is an adult. It might be different for different people, but I think the key in terms of defining what an adult is that it has to be the same for heterosexuals as homosexuals, regardless of what we think that adult is. It has to be the same. I think that's the key.
So below that age, then it's not okay. Is that what you're saying?
I think, again, I'm not going to criticise if there's two 15-year-olds want to, shack up together and have sex. I'm not going to, have a go at them or report them to the police. But if a 40-year-old's getting with a 12-year-old, then I'm not going to say that's good, no matter whether it's what sexuality it is.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Jen?
Should I stand up?
Yeah, if you like, yeah.
I was just going to ask, do you feel that the Church of England has compromised its basis and its beliefs just to be politically correct in some ways?
No, because I think there are some Christian people who use the Bible like a rule book, okay? For me, the thing at the heart of Christianity is Jesus. And I think the fact that God chose to come to us in the form of a person implies something about the way God wants to communicate with us. Because, as you know, person-to-person communication involves issues like compassion, accommodation, all these things. And I think because at the heart of Christianity we've got Jesus, that is actually an invitation to be creative as time passes and as we explore more and more what we understand about the Christian faith. It's an invitation to be creative and to explore what it means to be human, and in the light of that, to reflect on Christian teachings. So I don't, if you call that compromise, that's fine. But I wouldn't. I think in a way, compromise is a slightly negative term. I'd see it in a more positive way.
Do you want to come back? Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, I do understand what you're saying with that, particularly with Jesus Christ. When you look through the Gospels, you see that even though he sat with many that were called sinners, and the ones that Jews were called sinners and Gentiles, he sat with those that were seen to do wrong. He did show compassion in a way, but at the same time, he never compromised what he was teaching. So at the same time, while he would accommodate for those that may have been in a sinful way, he never said that it was acceptable in a way. So he taught them the truth, and with the love and compassion he showed them, not condemning them, but showing them the true way. That's when they came over, and that's when they were converted. He never did once compromise what he came to do. And that's why I asked the question, because I feel that sometimes the Church of England, rather than sticking to scriptural basis, are compromising what they're doing in general just to be politically correct, when they think they're it's going to be quite a lot of pressure upon the church. And I feel that I kind of feel like that's kind of like a coward's way out, not to aim at you just in general. Yeah, that's just my view.
Did you want to?
I mean, I could say Jesus didn't say anything about homosexuality, but that would be a bit cheap. But what I will say is, I think if we were there when, at the time of Jesus or the time of Paul, and we asked them about this, they said that they didn't go with it. This was not the kind of behaviour they would sanction. They would say they would set out a model of family life which was heterosexual. But the trouble is, St. Paul does specifically condemn homosexuality, but what he was condemning, which was what was going on in Roman society at the time, is wholly different from what we're talking about when we talk about it today. And maybe later on in the discussion there's a chance to say how homosexuality and homosexual behaviour in the Roman world was wholly different from what we're talking about today. But it was all about power relationships between older men and young boys and all sorts of things. And it's just not at all surprising that Paul would have condemned that.
Okay. Hanif, do you want to comment on that?
I'm not an expert on the Church of England or the scriptures. I would like to kind of to comment on that. The way I see it is that if there's someone from the Church of England or someone who is a Christian and they want to say, they come to me, for example, and they say, look, I'm LGBT, but I'm also a Christian, these two things are really important to me. I see it as my job as someone who represents students to try and facilitate that, whether I think it can go together or not.
Okay. Brendan, did you want to?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I just want to say first, I think it's a very good event. I wish I could go on longer than 8. I was raised up as a Catholic. My mother was Italian, my father was Irish. So you can imagine, Pope on the wall, it was fantastic. But the one thing I find quite, I take the point up there, sorry, I don't know your name, where he said that Jesus never turned around and said, okay, fine, all the rest of it. But the Bible itself, I find, is full of two contradictions. You have the first half of the Bible that condemns anything, the old you don't even breathe. But the second half of the Bible turns around, when they ask Jesus what we should do to get into heaven, all he says is, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, and basically treat one another as you would like to be treated. He doesn't turn around and say you should prosecute anyone and be cruel to people because they have different sexuality or different beliefs or anything else. So I just wondered how any faith, I only speak of the Christian faith, can sort of project an image of this is how it should be when the Bible itself isn't clear on what we should be doing.
Well, I think in a way I've already reacted to that simply by saying at the heart of Christianity is Jesus. Yes, the Bible is important because it bears witness to Jesus, but at the end of the day, the revelation is a human one, and that has given Christians 2,000 years of history to try and understand what that means if God is revealing himself as a human person. And by revealing himself as a human person, he's valuing humanity. And that's not just some of humanity, that's all of humanity. Okay.
I just wanted to make a comment as Anglican myself, that when we're talking about the Bible, we need to look at it in a historical context because it is a historical text. And I don't think the Anglican Church ever says anywhere, like in the Nicene Creed or anything, says that the Bible is the infallible word of God and every single word of it is inspired. That's not what the Anglican Church believes. So this issue of compromise doesn't really mean anything to me because you have to keep interpreting and looking at these scriptures and looking at the whole thing as, by those authors from that time and all in its context. So, that's why I don't take all these bits and that's why I don't take it too seriously. But I don't really have a question, that was more of a comment. But yeah.
That's fine. We're welcome to contribute. That's fine. Yeah.
Hi, sorry. Sorry, it's less a response to you, just a response to the lady, I don't know what her name is. If you see it as it's not the entirely perfect of God, that doesn't mean the whole authority of the book is compromised in itself, so which means that your faith is based on something that might be right or might be wrong. So you might as well scrap the whole book.
I can get you out of that one. You're kind of using the thin end of the wedge because to say I want to talk about Paul's teaching on homosexuality in historical context is one thing. To say, oh, Jesus, you know, if you doubt that, you doubt Jesus existed, is a completely different thing. And I know you can sort of imagine it like the thin end of a wedge, but I don't see it like that. I see it like taking each thing on its own merits, in a sense.
Sorry, last reply.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, it's just that yeah, I do understand what you're saying. If you doubt that, you doubt Jesus. I don't doubt that. But at the same time, what was written in the Gospels wasn't written by Jesus himself. It was written by men, so his disciples. So it kind of applies to the same thing as what the lady says. It was written by men. So if it's infallible, then that means you can judge any part of it and say, I don't have to believe this, or I don't have to take this. So therefore, the whole basis of the whole Bible in general means that no one has a right to it.
Okay. I'm just going to take 2 points, one after the other. So lady in the white, and then lady in the green, and then any comments from our panelists, and then we'll move on to something a bit more specific. Okay.
Just in response to what you're saying, I think the point that you're making is one of the fundamental problems I find with quite a few Christians is this idea that you have to wholly believe. And the moment when you don't wholly believe, then you do not believe at all. I think that that's just almost borderline fanaticism, to be honest. And it is a book that was written in a completely historical time. Even as a black person, like there are bits in the Bible that basically say that we were cursed. And that, so therefore, like, should I then believe that I believe that I'm cursed because it's the Bible, and as a Christian, I must believe that the Bible is the truth and there is nothing that can be questioned in the Bible. It is a book at the end of the day. It is a literary text, a beautifully written one, but it has to be taken into context. When you start saying, oh, if you can doubt one thing, then you might as well not believe. It's just, you know, it's not black and white, basically. And if you put that in the context of what we're discussing about sexuality, it's the same thing with sexuality. Is not black and white. There are so many shades of grey. And that was one of the things about Jesus, that if you look at him as a political figure, made him interesting because he was revolutionary. In a time when things were black and white, he said, no, there are so many shades of grey. So that's just my response to like what you're saying.
One last comment from the lady with the green.
Yeah, I mean, just really following on from what you were saying, both of you, in fact, I just find a lot of what Paul wrote about was quite questionable anyway. If we took Paul at face value, we'd still, you know, have our women going into churches covered up. He was quite, you can interpret him as quite misogynistic, really. And then if you go back to the Old Testament, I think one of the main scriptures against homosexuality was in the book of Job, which essentially Job was protecting his men from being raped by the soldiers, so he gave up his daughters because, I'm not completely familiar with it, but essentially it boiled down to rape, not a loving consensual relationship with another person.
We will have a chance to probably go back on these themes later. I'm just very conscious of the time, so but you'll probably get a chance to rebut some of the points. Hanif, do you have any last comments on?
I was just saying, I think it's really important and interesting to bring up the kind of social and historical context. If you look at a lot of Islamic teachings and edicts from a couple of hundred years ago, the medieval ages, for example, where if you look at Arabic and Persian poetry, there's lots of examples of like poetry about homosexuality. A lot of the edicts against homosexuality were the kind of similar tone as they might be against alcohol. As in, like, well, we know a lot of you do it, but you shouldn't do it, and you know, come on, let's like stop it, kind of thing. Whereas now, in an era where, in a lot of parts of the world, actually homosexuality now is a bigger taboo than it was in that time. It's completely different, and it just shows how religion is interpreted by people at different times in different contexts. And I mean, I'm not a religious person, I want to put that out there. But if we don't acknowledge that things are different in different historical contexts, then how can we move on, like spiritually, ideologically, socially, at all, to adapt to new material conditions of the world?
Steve?
I think from the comments that came up, what's interesting is that it does highlight the fact that when you're talking about religion, you're talking about revelation. and people's understanding of revelation. And then, of course, when you're talking about revelation, which is, you know, Jesus, the Bible, the Quran, or whatever, that's revelation. The big question next is how do you deal with it?
Okay, so to structure the debate tonight a bit further to keep it quite topical, I'd like to ask the panellists their thoughts on homosexuals and them being able to marry, and also linked to that, do you think it should be allowed in a religious setting? And so, I mean, keep this one quite general, really.
The way I look at marriage, I mean, I don't think that two people have to be married to be in a loving relationship. I don't think that all relationships have to be loving to be mutually beneficial in some way. So long as people respect each other and are honest with each other. I think, again, if we look in terms of like history, families and societies have been organised on completely different lines to the nuclear family that we have now. And I think a lot of the time, actually, marriage in the nuclear family is where quite a lot of bad things happen for some people, but for other people, it's, you know, it can result in decades and decades of amazing love and friendship and companionship. And I think that's the key element there, is choice. So if I want to get married, but the state says I can't get married because my love for another man isn't equal to a man's love for another woman, then that's a problem there. So it's not necessarily, I don't think it's about each individual's kind of personal subjective view on whether marriage is a good thing or a bad thing. It's whether or not one set of people will say to another set of people, you can't get married because of my subjective belief on what marriage is and what marriage isn't. So that's kind of where I would come from. And what was the second part?
In a religious setting.
I think it's really difficult because if you almost force people to, if you force kind of religious organisations or churches or mosques or synagogues to have those ceremonies, when that battle of minds hasn't yet been won, possibly that actually won't help to engender the kind of atmosphere where people would be accepting of same-sex marriages in a religious setting. So what I would quite like to see, rather than just kind of bringing in lots of laws, although I do obviously believe in like legislation to protect LGBT people, is empowering religious people themselves to be able to have their own churches. LGBT religious people have their own churches, have their own type of ceremonies, while at the same time trying to win that kind of battle of ideas with establishments, rather than just kind of coming in from the outside and saying you are wrong, you're backward. And just quickly, I want to highlight something else that I think is really dangerous with that, especially with faith communities which also tie in with ethnicity. So African churches, you hear a lot about, Muslims you hear a lot about in the news. It used to be like Jews used to get it in the neck all the time, as we know. And if it just seems like a lot of kind of educated liberal white people coming in and saying, well, you're backward because you hate gays, you're backward because you hate women, that's not actually going to help bridge the gap. And there's going to be a lot of people in those communities who might be LGBT, like I'm from a Muslim background myself, who might say, actually, well, between the homophobia of like my family and my parents who actually raised me and loved me, and the racism of these kind of like establishment white people, I'm always going to choose to stay with my community and my family. And that way, the problems of homophobia and LGBT phobia are never going to be kind of flattened down. So what we really need to be doing is having events like this where people can actually come together as equal humans and like have discussions like that on a kind of mutual respect basis.
Okay, well in British society, if you're a heterosexual couple, you can have a civil wedding. If you're a gay couple, you can have a civil partnership. So the law of the land does allow a committed relationship for gay couples where they benefit from all the protection and all the tax advantages and so on that heterosexual couples benefit from. So on that level, at a legal level, there's parity in this country between gay couples and heterosexual couples who want to make a legal commitment. Now, as it happens in the Church of England at the moment, if a gay couple went to a church and said to a vicar, will you marry us in your church, that wouldn't be possible. The church law doesn't allow it. I think the question I would ask is, why on earth would a gay couple want to be married in a church? Because a church wedding is a sort of patriarchal artifice. It's something that kind of works on certain assumptions about the role of the man, the role of the woman, that they'll have 2.2 children, and at the wedding there'll be something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue, and all that. And I think it's probably pretty unlikely that a gay couple would present themselves to a church and say, we really want a white wedding kind of thing. I think most clergy in the Church of England would probably say, well, if you go and get yourself a civil partnership, and if it means a lot to you to have your relationship somehow blessed and affirmed by the church, then it may be possible to have some sort of church service. But as I said, it's not a question of opinion, it's a question of fact that at the moment in the Church of England you couldn't have a wedding service for a gay couple.
Okay. I'd like to open this one out to the audience now. Oh, straight up. Okay, I'm going to prioritise people that haven't spoken first. So, lady in the purple.
I think that's just such a ridiculous thing to say. That that gay people wouldn't want to get married in a church. I'm Catholic. I can't imagine getting married in a church or like a white wedding or another tradition. I think it's just a really stupid thing to say, but people don't want that.
Can I add to that as a partner? I'm atheist, and even I have always still sort of envisioned marriage in a church. And you say that you don't know why a gay couple would want the idea of marriage and having children and a white wedding, but they do. Like, a lot of gay people want to have kids in a marriage, just like straight people do.
Okay, I didn't mean that gay people wouldn't want to have kids, but I mean I would pick up on the idea. If you said you're an atheist,
Yeah.
So wouldn't it be hypocritical to have a wedding in the church?
I don't think so, because as someone who's with someone who's Catholic, I go to church with her on Sundays. I'd like to get married in a church. I support her religion, but I don't think it's fair to say that gay people wouldn't want marriage, because we do. I mean, of course, not everyone does, obviously.
If straight people can get married in a church, what should it be?
If we take a few more contributions to the audience and then maybe back off with a wider argument. Yeah, gentleman back.
I just want to point out again on what Steve was saying about some people who wouldn't want to. What Hanif was saying earlier on was that it's all to do with choice and free will and things like that. For example, on Monday this week, amendment was changed in the Civil Partnerships Act, which got rid of the ban on civil partnerships in religious settings. I know the Church of England has said that at the moment they're not wanting that sort of thing, but other churches have done. Like, for example, Quakers have said that they would be willing to perform religious ceremonies for same-sex unions. So things are changing. It's all to do with free choice. Like, some religions are quite prone to it, some religions wouldn't want to. So it's just a comment on the question.
And the religions have been given choice.
Again, yeah, it's not happening. So if some religions want to, they can, but there's not a blanket ban. But there are opt-outs.
I'll just take two more comments from the audience and then we'll see what panelists think. Okay, lady in the red.
Personally, I believe that gay people should be allowed to get married in a church wherever they want to get married. The statement you made about going to a white wedding, it doesn't matter on whether they're male or female. Marriage to me is between love and love between two people. It doesn't matter whether they're both male or female. And the fact that he said they would want a white wedding. If it's two lesbians, then since they were children, they've always dreamed of a white wedding. So for you to kind of say because they're marrying another woman, they won't want a white wedding is kind of, to me, it actually is very, very...
I did say at the beginning that basically the tradition, the classic wedding service traditions we have, I think the important point was that these are something that we've inherited through a patriarchal society. So although there may be sentimental reasons for wanting that, and I'd honour that, I think the point is we have to think about how the trappings of a classic church wedding really relate to where we are as a society now. Where obviously we're not a patriarchal society, and we are, there are different ways of doing things. I think that's what I meant. But I think more than one of you have got me to appreciate that there are strong sentimental reasons as well.
We take something for lady.
Just moving on from the sentiments and just breaking down what exactly marriage is. I grew up Catholic. I'm not atheist. I'm more agnostic. That's just my personal belief. But I have a very strong knowledge of Catholicism because I'm Catholic. And marriage in the Catholic Church is seen as a sacrament. And the whole purpose of marriage is for reproduction, for reproduction, for children to be able to come into this, mother-father kind of environment. So, coming from a Catholic perspective, if you then have a gay marriage going on in a Catholic church, it doesn't make sense because it completely contradicts with what the purpose of marriage is in the Catholic Church, because that union cannot naturally bring forth children. And I think, just what marriage is supposed to be is, I think in religious settings, it's not really about love or all those emotional things. It's mostly about reproduction, that kind of practicality, again, like you were saying, a patriarchal structure. Now, my point against that is this. Before, when women used to say vows, they used to have to say that they would obey their husbands. Now, that has been removed, which means that it can change. What the concept of marriage in religious settings can change. So why can't the same be applied in the Church of England? Why can't the ceremonies be changed? Because even as a feminist, I disagree that it should be patriarchal. It should be about a partnership between two people coming together to try and, make a unit and again add something to community. So why can't the services change? The idea that because the services don't work for them, therefore they might not want it, is then irrelevant, because if you can change just a simple word, like a woman doesn't have to say that she would obey her husband, surely other things can change in theology in churches.
I don't know about that. From my point of view, I think that LGBT people don't want to they don't want the marriage or just because it's religious purposes. I think they want to have the option of being able to actually say, I can get married in a church, or I can get married in a synagogue or mosque, but I don't want to. I think it's having the option there, rather than people going blind out, no, you can't do it.
Yeah, I think that's been a really good discussion. A lot of people that I've talked to really it is their biggest dream to get married, and a lot of people, if you are religious and you don't believe in sex before marriage, but you can't consummate your marriage, you can't have a religious marriage under God the way that you think is right, then what are the consequences of that for your relationship in the future? For some people, that means that they can never have sex with their partner, and that's the reality for some people. And I think sometimes it's a kind of flippant attitude. It's to be like, oh, well, gay people will never stick to that anyway because they're so promiscuous. And that's almost sometimes some of the attitudes sometimes you get from people, which is really unfortunate. And the way you're describing marriage, I mean, I'm surprised any straight people are still getting married. If it's that sounds and from a personal point of view, that's kind of the reason that I might not get married. But again, for your conception of what marriage is, my conception of what marriage is, isn't the issue here. It's what your conception of marriage is and whether you can carry that out for yourself. And just in terms of marriage being about fertility, I mean, I'm like a Shiite Catholic, right? So I've got quite a good background. Obviously, if you know about the reproduction, that kind of thing. What about infertile people? What about people who are born without the ability to have children? Does that mean that they are empty? They have no purpose in life if it's just about reproduction? So there's all these kind of issues, and again, it comes back to choice. And there's always going to be that difficulty in saying to a mosque or a synagogue or a church that you have to do this. And especially, again, I reiterate if it is a minority community, because it's difficult, because on the one hand you want to fight homophobia, but on the other hand you want to kind of make sure that it doesn't seem like it's just attacking minority communities, because that can be really dangerous as well. So I think rather than just having laws, I think it's got to be a constant dialogue, and that we have made a lot of progress in the last 10, 20 years, and I'm convinced that we'll continue making that progress if we have carry on having that two-way dialogue.
I think I agree with what you're saying. I mean, when you think about how things have moved in the last 50 or 60 years, legalisation of homosexuality between consenting adults in church in the last 20, 30 years in the Church of England, you can, if you're a divorced person, you can probably get remarried in church when you marry again, usually as long as your new partner wasn't instrumental in the difficulties of the previous marriage. So there are accommodations being made, but I think the trouble is, going back to what we said a bit earlier, you have to take people with you over this. because the Church of England is set up in such a way that there's a kind of a branch of the Church of England which is semi-autonomous in every community. And if the vicar in a village says, right, I'm going to, you know, it's possible to marry gay people in church, if that were possible, he'd have to convince that, or she would have to convince that the community, who are the church isn't the vicar, the church is the community. They'd have to convince the community that this was something the community wanted to go with, because you can't suddenly do something to communities that they feel very uneasy and insecure about. And what you said about the vows and you know how the vows have changed, so the woman doesn't always have to say obey. That was probably quite a big deal when that was changed. But I think it would be much harder to get communities behind church leaders all over the country over something which would be a bit more radical, like actually saying, okay, in our church we're going to marry gay couples. So it's like what you said, it takes time to get people behind you on things. But then again, as I said, that would have certainly been the case with the remarriage of divorced people in churches, which would have been impossible not long ago.
Just before we move on to the next subject, I'm very conscious that a lot of the discussion has been around the Christian faith and their responses to homosexual marriage. I'm just wondering if we have any contributions from a perspective of other faiths or about religion more generally. Yes.
Well, with regards to Islam itself, it does forbid the practice of homosexuality, but it provides an alternative. For example, the mosque itself, if a gay or a lesbian individual were to approach the mosque and tell them about their situation, obviously, a mosque wouldn't approve of it, but they would have to help them with the issue. And as Muslims, I believe that with the help of God, you can overcome these things, because if you truly do love God and you really want to follow a religion, then you will find a way out of it. Essentially, what Islam does say is that it's forbidden, but like you can't, or gay, or if you're gay, or lesbian, or transgender, you're not supposed to be frowned upon in society, which I think a lot of people have got the wrong idea about Islam in that sense. And yeah, that's just something I would clear up. Yeah.
Any other comments, contributions?
So no, I just wanted to ask you a question, actually.
Okay, very briefly, and then...
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question, because for me that then raises up the issue of tolerance and acceptance. Like, so are you saying, okay, we can tolerate them, they're gay, okay, fine, as long as, because that's like, I think coming from my end, that's what happens. We can tolerate them, they're gay, don't kill them, but they're gay, they're bad people. If your child is gay, like, take them to church, remove the demons and, whatever. But you see, that for me is the problem. So I don't even know which one is worse, tolerance or acceptance. Like, I think that just raised that question for me. As in, the point for me is this, is like, it seems like it's just tolerating rather than accepting that this is how they are. It's almost like you're basically saying, okay, fine, don't kill them or stone them or tell them that they can't have a life because they're gay, but they're still not okay.
Well, that's not exactly the case. I mean, we don't see it as a disease or anything. If you look at it from a biological perspective, some scientists would argue that a lot of it's hormones and it's not exactly your genes or anything. But with Islam, it's not as if if someone's gay, you don't treat them in the same way or anything. It's just that because Islam doesn't allow gay marriages, it's because of the whole concept of a marriage being there, so that two individuals can tie the bond and reproduce, obviously. But obviously with a gay couple, how can I say this? I mean, for instance, if you take the idea of children and two children child being adopted by a gay couple, would it not have an impact on the child?
No.
For example, if you've got a child with...
we're actually going to address that topic a bit later, so we'll come back to it then. Not related to childhood or anything like that. Very quickly then.
ask, is it what you're saying is Islam said, okay, it forbids homosexuality, but say if you were gay, but you wanted to be a practicing Muslim, then you have to address that.
You don't exactly have to address it, but if you do your research, you'll see that you'll understand why God doesn't allow homosexuality, and you can obviously still be a practicing Muslim at the same time, and it should be tolerated. I mean, if someone, you can't change that, but you try and explain to them why it's not allowed.
Hold on. I'm just going to take two comments from people that have had a hand up. So, and then go in the black there. And then we won't have rebuttals, then we're just going to move on. Okay?
Just like, I think any other religion where Christianity, like, I don't know about Judaism or any other religion, they forbid homosexuality. So in Islam, it's kind of like, you know, the same. But I don't think it really matters, because I think you could be religious and LGBT and still practice. Does it actually honestly matter? As long as you, like, you know, follow everything else and, like, you know, love God like any other, you know, straight person, does it actually matter whether you're LGBT and religious?
Okay, last of all.
Yeah, I think you can be LGBT and a Muslim. But one of the articles of being a Muslim, one of the faiths of being a Muslim is to accept the Quran as the word of God. And to be gay is to contradict the Quran. If you're saying that to be gay is okay, then I don't think you can be a Muslim because it's contradicting. But if you're being gay and you admit it's wrong, then I think you can be a Muslim.
We are going to come back to a lot of these themes in following discussions, so I'm sure you'll get to it. Just wanted any last thoughts from our panelists before we move on?
I think, again, this is one of the big points of interpretation, because if we take the idea that the Quran is the complete word of God, but if we look at, like, for example, like praying, it doesn't lay out how to pray. It's the Quran, it's the following in the way of the Prophet. So to say, again, this is just to highlight how interpretation is completely different. If you said, right, the Quran is the complete whole word of God, the complete way to live your life, then you could say, I don't have to pray. Some people would say that. Some people say that the Quran doesn't mention it's compulsory to cover your hair. Some people would argue that's compulsory to cover your face because of some of the hadiths that say this. You know, people are very, very adamant about it. So again, this is completely about interpretation, and I think you've already highlighted important things that actually a lot of Muslim people I talk to actually don't hear from their societies or their peers, is that you can be a Muslim and LGBT, and that your Islam is between you and Allah, which is the main thing. Like, as long as you accept, you know, Allah Muhammad, then that's between you and God. The rest of it, and you'll be judged afterwards. And I think so long as it's based on, we're not going to judge you. If you say you're religious and you're LGBT and you want to practice both things, I might disagree with you, and I'm not going to pretend, I'm not going to lie that I think what you're doing is according to the teachings of God. But I'm not going to try and stand in the way of you practicing your beliefs on campus, where we're both supposed to be studying here as equals.
I think it's back to what you said in the last section. If you're religious, you've got your revelation. The revelation is there. How are you going to deal with it?
Okay, our next topic we've already started to touch on, but I just wanted the panel's opinions on whether same-sex couples should be allowed to adopt and raise children.
Well, yes, the law of the land allows it, and I'd always go along with that. I think the important thing is good parenting. There's quite a lot of good parenting about in society as a whole. There's quite a lot of bad parenting about as well. I think gay couples, when they adopt children, probably thought quite a lot about how good they're going to be as parents and so on. I think the other thing, some people are kind of spooked by the idea about gay couples adopting children, as if there's something slightly sexually sinister about it. But I think ask any parent, and the last thing, that there's just no overlap between parent sex lives and the whole business about rearing children. And I expect even when the children are grown up, it's about the one thing that grown-up child's parents would never discuss. The two things are just completely different areas. But as I said, I think there is an issue about people you know, we all personally people think that homosexual people might be paedophiles and all this stuff, but you know, that's just what people think is not true.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that people never flag up the issue. For example, if there's a child and they have a mother and a father, and their father dies, and then they're then raised by their mother and their auntie, and that's quite a common thing, especially in, you know, foreign countries where people tend to live with extended families and they're raised by lots of different people, and there might actually not be any men. The man might be out working for like 2 years ago in a different country. But people would never kind of say, oh, well, you know, this kid is being raised by 2 women or 2 men, and it's unhealthy, and they're not going to be able to get the kind of both elements, like the masculine side and the feminine side in their upbringing. And also it rests on the premise that men and women are inherently different and that they bring inherently different things to a child's upbringing. And actually there's some men who are, you know, very, very, like what people would say were typical feminine kind of traits, who are very like maternal, for example. There'll be some women who maybe don't want to like have a child, or they've had a child and they don't really want to raise it, etc., etc. And I think one of the problems with when we're talking about how a child needs a man and a woman, male and a parent, is that it rests on those gender binaries that says this is what a woman is, this is what a man is, and in order to complete themselves, the child needs the influences from both. When actually it's completely wrong. I actually think that as many people, as many loving, different, diverse people that a child interacts with, that's actually going to be the key to making sure that that child can see life from as many different angles and is a more tolerant and kind of whole individual as they grow up.
Thank you. Any comments on, again, I'll be prioritising people that haven't contributed yet. Guy in the register.
Okay, speaking from experience, I used to be a counsellor part-time, and children who have been adopted by gay parents, it might come to background, it's quite common. But the thing is, these children suffer socially. So I'm just going to give this question to you, that how would you tell the children who are adopted by gay parents to deal with society? Because society, at the moment, homosexuality is the norm right now, and people do frown upon homosexuals, and children who be raised by homosexuals, whether men or women. So how would you deal or tell the individual how to deal with it socially? Because there's a big social aspect to it, and these people are broken down, they get bullied every day, and literally there's one group that just wants to end his life. So I'm just wanting to ask you, what advice would you give to this individual?
I think the first thing to say in discussions like this, there's never a 100% easy way out where no one's going to get hurt. There's no kind of like click the fingers that we can do where no one's going to grow up in that situation. Like, it's all about process. And actually the question for me isn't about what that child can do, it's about what we can do to challenge those ideas in society so that their kids don't have to suffer those consequences. And also there's a lot of kids who actually have committed suicide. If you look in America, for example, recently there's been a massive spate of LGBT teenagers who killed themselves because they are LGBT or perceived to be LGBT. So if the logic of the answer, and I wasn't saying this is what you were saying, is that gay people shouldn't be able to adopt because those children will then suffer social stigma, then the logical consequence of that argument is to say to young LGBT people to stop acting gay or to change who you are so that you don't suffer social stigma for how you act. And I think that's the danger of that, and I think actually what we have to say first and foremost is that if there is this prejudice and there is this bigotry in society, then we as a society have to respond and face up to that, and actually it's what can we do rather than what can those children do is the first question I'd be asking.
Steve, do you have anything?
Nothing to add.
That's fine. Yeah, you had a question? Great.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I think gay couples or homosexual couples have to go through so much more of a process to have a child than any straight person can have a child if they want to, and they could be socially responsible, how do you want to call it? Anyone can have it, but gay people have to be basically vetted to have a child, and they would have to really, really want the child to go through that. So for them to go through that to have the child. So I think in some cases, it's not always, like gay couples would always look after or try to look after the child as best they could because they always really want it. And I don't think just because you have heterosexual parents that they are, as you say, going to be better parents. I mean, I'm not the best child to have than I straight parents, and they're all, that's the thing, but I don't think that's a good argument to have, that just because you have two men or two women, that you're going to have inferior childhood. And with the bullying thing as well, to be honest, if it's not, if you've got gay parents, it's going to be because you've got ginger hair or because you're black. Because you've got, I mean, I've got because you've got a posh voice. I mean, like, if it's not that, it'll be something else. That's my point. So I think just saying, well, you might get bullied because of it, it's not good enough reason to say you can't adopt.
Linked to what you were saying about parenthood, because homosexuals cannot naturally have a child. They have to go through certain, for instance, NHS procedures to have children. It's a much more lengthy process and it requires much more emotion and thought than just, oh, I'm up the dark. Which is, what happens so much, people have unwanted children and they, parenting can be bad in that situation. So I think any suggestion that homosexuals would be worse parents is ridiculous because it's such a much bigger issue because of the way society treats it and because it's not a natural process. But then also what you were saying, and then what you were saying about the bullying, 50 years ago, if your mother was unmarried and you didn't know who your father was, you would have been treated terribly. Even, not just in middle class society, but in any society. And that's now changed, Loads of people have single mothers, loads of people don't know who their parents are, they don't know who their father is. And that's changed, and society is always changing. As, perhaps we become less naive and less ignorant and more accepting of the different ways of life.
Brendan and Meg.
And I was just going to say, I think the focus should be not on who adopts, but the fact that there are children in care. I can't remember the exact figure, but I think it was something the other week in the House of Commons said it was about 60,000 children or something across England, not the rest of the UK, but just England, are in care. Now, if I've got a queue of homosexual couples lining up out there saying they want to adopt a child that's experienced all sorts of horrific things, why not? You've got families, dysfunctional, straight, gay, whatever. If they lose their child, they go into care. That child, it's a cost to the state. It's a problem because it doesn't have that same. I don't think anyone was in care, but I used to work with for a while in social services. And I just think, why not let a child have that opportunity to be brought up? I mean, Romulus and Remus were raised by wolves. It doesn't really matter, does it? So I think if you've got a couple there who are willing to look after children, they're not just, it's not as I think Tim said, there is a perception that it's a promiscuous reason, but I think, no, people want to have children because they love children, they want to see them do well, they want to buy things, so, all parenting things, so just get on with it.
I think it's kind of like following on from the marriage thing, it's like that choice, it's like, I've grown up, I want to be married, I want to have kids. I'm not going to be able to just sleep with my husband or whatever, because I'm not going to have a husband, I'll have a wife. But so there's more thought that goes into it, gay men are more likely to adopt, because with lesbians, it's possible for one of them through, artificial insemination and stuff like that to have a child. So, coming from a lesbian's perspective, that's half of your child anyway, it's half of you. So, and it's like, I think the point is good parenting rather than who is the parents. There's plenty of people that have got, grandparents bring up kids, uncles and aunts bring up, it doesn't matter who brings up the kids as long as that kid has a loving home and that they the people that are looking after them love them and they're given a good home, then I think that's all that matters.
Tim, isn't it?
Yeah. I just wanted to say that if children with gay parents are being bullied, surely that's the responsibility of the bullies and the teachers rather than the kids' parents. I just wanted to say that.
Just another quick statement. I mean, it really wasn't that long ago that people saw interracial marriage and children as something deeply abhorrent, and I even remember hearing somebody once say, "Oh, but it's really unfair on the kids." But nobody's going to call into question, the very capability of, say, a black and a white woman, black man, white woman, or vice versa, having a child. That is all.
I was going to say that I agree with the point that upbringing itself is what is important, and if you have a loving upbringing, then that's the most important thing for a child. However, I have questioned that doesn't a child have a right to know who their biological parents are? I mean, maybe it doesn't matter to everyone, but should it, if it does matter to that person as they get older, should they not have the option for that to happen? Is it always in situations when you have artificial insemination? Is it possible? I'm not sure if that's possible. Is it possible to know who their
I'll take a few more contributions and then I'll have some reactions from the panelists. So did you have another one?
No, I was going to say the answer is I think it is, and you can. I think it's at 18 you can find out, or 16. I think in the States it's a bit of the that you can just literally write up and say, I want to know who my donor was or who I was adopted from. As long as there aren't any legal reasons, if you're taking to care, then there's no reason why you can't. Like as a parent, you can say no.
And is that with adoption as well?
So it depends on how. It does depend on how you adopt it as well.
But that's not strictly to do with LGBT.
No, that's just general. But if you're left in the doorstep, and that's you're given up for adoption.
Sorry, I keep on talking. But I think what you were saying, I think what worries me a little when it comes particularly to artificial insemination and all these free sperm flowing all over the country. The problem really is everyone knows what the issues are with incest and what can happen if people that don't know they're related come together, and I think that's when people get a little bit iffy. It's if everyone is having kids in lesbian relationships and they're using artificial donors and all this kind of stuff, reproduction is becoming too scientific, and then some like we see with the environment, when we mess with it, it messes with us back, and it's almost like people are afraid of what would be the end product of all this continuous scientification of reproduction. I think that's just kind of a question mark, really, for me. And it's something I'm just throwing out there.
Okay, so reactions from our panelists.
I think a lot of the issues that people have raised are actually things that affect heterosexual couples as well. A very surprisingly large number of heterosexual couples have to go through IVF or other things in order to conceive or even think about adopting. And that's happening more and more now because women are getting older and older before they start thinking about children. So it's an area where a lot of those issues overlap.
You want to have a nightmare now about sperm all over the I think it's just on that point, I think it's quite an interesting comment. And I don't know if it's some sort of testing or procedures where they work that out, but it'd be quite interesting to go and find out. I think Google, but with a safe search on.
Don't just my kids see it. Okay, to move on from this one, the next topic I'd like to put to the panel is how or should religion accept non-binary or transgender people into their communities? And you've already touched on this, Hanif, so I'll start with you.
Right, I mean, trans issues are so, it's even kind of more on the margin than LGBT issues. And it's really difficult sometimes when you've been around that LGBT kind of activism politics for a while to kind of appreciate how far back, without trying to sound that horrible, people kind of can be with trans issues. But I think it comes back again to that thing of forcing things onto people and trying to have that dialogue with people, whilst also not kind of bending over to any kind of pressures. That was taxi. So I think, and again, there's so many different interpretations about trans. So, for example, in Iran, where Max and my family are from, it's legal to have a sex change, and the government will pay for half of the operation. Whereas it's homosexuality can be punishable by death. So obviously you've got kind of not all together kind of together policies there. So it's a very difficult one to take up because some people can be at all different levels. Like some people can be alright with LGBT issues, really like kind of freaked out by trans issues. Some people can be really alright with trans issues, but like sort of freaked out by LGBT issues. So I don't really think there's an easy way to talk about it. But one thing I have found is that a lot of trans people find spirituality and religion really, really important to them. And I think one of the really encouraging things that I've seen recently is like LGBT faith groups themselves coming together in towns and communities. And I think linking up trans people with those groups first, which are automatically a safe space, before then maybe trying as a whole to bridge the gap between LGBT-friendly religious organisations and kind of establishment organisations.
You'll have to go after me.
I was just saying, could Hanif just explain maybe for those that don't know what trans issues are, because there might be some people in the room that...
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, well, I mean, trans, sometimes you see trans and then followed by like a little asterisk, and it's quite a broad term. So it doesn't just mean people who feel that their biological sex doesn't fit in with how they feel in terms of their gender. It can also mean people who, for example, don't agree with the gender binaries. So, for example, I don't define as a man because I think the concept of a man has like changed in different times, and I think it's just a bit of a social construct. But I don't want to like to transition into becoming a biological female. So trans is quite a broad term that can encompass a whole range of people. Some of who really, really want to transition, and that's kind of stereotypical image that you'd expect when you hear the word trans as someone who's gone through gender reassignment surgery. But there's also people who just feel like they don't like the way that everyone is pushed into you're either a man or a woman, and there's actually a lot more kind of fluidity to it all.
Okay, well, I mean, obviously I mentioned, and we talked a lot about this, obviously, about revelation and sacred texts and all this sort of thing, and what we think about that. But I think one thing you can be pretty confident about is that ancient sacred texts, however much they're used in society today, I mean, Bible and similar things, the ethical teaching and the understanding of humanity and human nature that they display is not scientifically informed in the way that our understanding of humanity and gender and sexuality issues is scientifically informed today. So that's something that there needs to be a dynamic between the people who read and use the sacred texts and what we understand now about these issues. But one thing that interested me, in fact last week, one of my jobs that I do in my spare time, I sit on panels where we select people who are wanting to go into professional Christian ministry, and I do that for the Church of England. And in some of the stuff I was asked to use, to read through, there was actually, I was quite surprised, but there was actually stuff about transgender people and how, as a selector, I'm meant to react or not react in that situation. And basically, without going into any detail, that showed that as far as the Church of England is concerned, its level of acceptance of transgender people got at least as far as accepting them into professional ministry, subject to criteria, of course, other criteria about their suitability to do professional Christian ministry.
Thank you. I'd like to invite comments and contributions from the audience, but I'd just like to remind people that we're not discussing, it's not a debate on the genders, whether there are genders or not, or whether they're a grey area. But we are talking about trans people's acceptance into religious communities and vice versa. So if we start right at the back, the guy in the blue.
It's more of a question. Do you think that the legislative, like I come from the Christian perspective, do you think there should be legislation that would mean that churches should have to hire entirely on the basis as employers have to hire? Or do you think there's grounds for difference? So should religious organisations have to come under the same umbrella as other employers?
There are already some provisions for religious organisations. For example, there are some posts where they can specify that the post is either only open to men or only open to women. I think a religious organisation would be very foolish now if it went down the road of trying to specifically exclude transgender people. And I don't think they would find the law was on their side.
Okay. And then I'll go to you. I'll go straight back.
What I find, what I've heard about in America, especially in the States, where same-sex marriage is legal, the problem with trans is, in that context, is that the church doesn't recognize people who identify as trans as they still see them at their gender that was assigned to them at birth. So if someone who was a female assigned at birth but considered to be a trans man, just a male, still would have to go through the same-sex marriage process rather than seeing that person as a man marrying a woman. They still consider him being a woman marrying a woman, which also goes then for other states where same-sex marriage isn't legal. A trans man still couldn't marry a woman because the church would still see the trans man as female, and that I think is an issue because what people don't seem to see is that someone who's female assigned birth but considers to be a man is straight if they love a woman and not gay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah. It's very interesting that you brought up the topic of transgender people in ministry, because that's what I wanted to ask you before it came up. I was going to ask, basically, in my girlfriend's ex-church, there was a transgender person as part of the congregation, and they were kind of expelled and treated horribly, which I personally don't agree with. I don't think anyone should be treated as a freak. I think we should all treat everyone with love. But I was going to ask you particularly, if somebody, for instance, someone that was a transgender came to you and said they wanted to be part of your ministry, personally, you know, in the effect it would have from maybe like superiors, the social effects as well. How would you deal with that person? Would you then accept, would you then say, okay, you can train them up, and even though you'll be getting all the social pressures from your superiors as well? Or would you have to say, okay, well, I can't really do it because of what's going to affect that's on me? And what is your personal opinion on it as well?
Right, well, as I said before, I think churches aren't just ministers. Churches are groups of people.
Yeah.
And on the whole, for church communities to exist and thrive, you've got to take the people with you. That doesn't mean that you don't challenge them as well. I think, in reality, the scenario you describe, it may not be as difficult as you think, because often the idea of something is not as is kind of worse than the reality. Because you all have probably heard people say, "Oh well, I'm not sure about gay people in general. But I do have a friend who's gay, and I get on with them really well." Do you know what I mean? That when it's something that they're actually, you know, that it's something that's real in their life, they can cope with it perfectly well. But somehow the idea, when it's not something that's real and they engage with it, is different. So I think it's quite difficult to respond to your point, because, you know, I just don't know what kind of scenario you know, that you'd have to kind of live, it would have to be a lived experience.
Okay, like, particularly I was referring to, for instance, when you wanted to be in your ministry, say they wanted to like train on you as like a junior pastor or something like that, and then they would go, if you were going to train them, they would go on to lead the congregation. How would you feel about that person?
Well, I think it wouldn't be my choice. It would probably be a bishop saying, "I want you to train this person," and I'd say, "Okay, fine. If you think I'm a suitable person to do that, I'd do it." I wouldn't say, "Oh no, I'm not going to do that." Or, you know, I'd do it if that's what I was asked to do.
Sorry, last rebuttal. Is that okay? If it was up to you, so it was up to you personally.
It wouldn't be.
But if it was,
it's hypothetical.
Do you have anything to come back on? If anyone asked me to be a minister, I'd probably tell them they've got the wrong person, to be honest. But I think trans inclusion is really, really important, obviously, and one of the issues with it is that it's not someone saying, you're gay, I disagree with you being gay. It's someone saying, you're saying this is your gender, and I'm telling you that's not your gender, which is a whole different kettle of fish, because you're telling someone that they're not what they say they are. So you're not only judging someone, you're defining them for them, which is a really disempowering experience for them.
And it just shows that, I know we don't want to get into like the gender argument, but for a lot of people, gender is up here, not just like elsewhere in their bodies. And I think that's something that's really, really important to understand. And just on the point of taking people with you, like as I've said all the way through the meeting, I think it is really important that it's not just kind of legislation, it's not just people saying, like, you have to do this, you have to do that, because sometimes that can backfire. But at the same time, there has to be people who stand up and who are trailblazers, because there were times where like black people couldn't go into churches in some white communities, and like at that time I would have hoped that people wouldn't have just said, you know, well, you know, we've got to kind of go nicely about it. There were some people who stuck their neck on the line, and it maybe, you know, messed up that community and maybe messed up their career. But 10, 20, 30 years down the line, there's people sitting in those churches praying to their God because of the actions of those people, and I hope that we can be those people in the future.
Okay, I'm just going to take a series of comments on this before we summarise on the trans issue. Okay, so
yeah. Just in response to the question, should trans people be welcomed by religious communities? Yes, I think so. I've always seen the church as a place that should be welcoming to all people. And just in relation to your comment about there being LGBT faith groups and a safe space for them, you know, to me it's a shame that there has to be a separate thing for LGBT religious people. They should be included in all other faith groups. They should be welcomed in all faith groups, personally, in my opinion.
I think the most important thing here is that as a Christian we stand for a God of love, and our God loves you whether you identify as a man, identify as a woman, whether you wear grunge clothes, whether you wear punk clothes, whatever you wear. God sees your spirit, and I think it's important for us to remember that if our God, who made the universe, who's this massive thing, can love anyone, why are we to say otherwise? Why is it our position to say, no, we don't love you because you're this, because you're that? In the end, it's going to come down to your spirit and to your soul, and in heaven we're all the same. Like, God loves everyone because whether you change your physical being, it's the same thing for God. Like, God sees you right to the heart, and He doesn't see your physical being, and it makes no difference to Him, so why should it make a difference to us? We should love you for who you are and who you say you are.
I just want to say something, like, no respect to gay people, but if you believe in God, like, let's say we believe in God, you just take whatever He says. Right? When you believe in God, you just take whatever He says, tells you to do, because He's God, He knows better. Alright, so why do we take whatever we want from the Bible or whatever we want from Quran and do that, and then the rest we just throw it away? I mean, as far as Quran, it says specifically that gays is forbidden. It talks about the Prophet Lut and how his people were, God murdered them because they were gays. I mean, as far as Quran, I don't know if it's mentioned in the Bible or not, so it says in Quran that it's forbidden. And as far, I just want to correct Hanif, the Quran touches on every single aspect of your normal, basic life. It even touches on how to finance your money-wise. I mean, money-wise, how to finance your life. And it tells you exactly how to pray and when to pray and why we pray. Just to mention that, I mean, like, because some people, like, sorry, I've studied the Quran has a different way of language that you need to actually study how to understand. So you can't just take one ayah or one surah and just make your own assumptions out of it, because you need to read the Quran from the beginning to the end to understand it fully. Because one ayah that it might, like, you can read one ayah from one surah and then go to another ayah from another surah that you see it's like a complete opposite of it. But then when you read the whole Quran, you can see it as a whole. It makes sense.
I just want to explain or tell people about Islam's perspective on transgender and transgender surgery. Obviously, Islam was revealed to the whole of mankind, so this includes transgender people, because obviously people are born with both genitalia, or they're born with a male shell but inside there are female organs, etc., etc. Basically, if a transgender operation would allow you to practice Islam better, then it's allowed. And if you have the operation, and there's men in Arab countries, and outside they're men, but inside they're women biologically, and they feel that they say that, oh, I'm a woman trapped inside a man. So and when they go to doctors in the Arab countries, obviously you have to go through logic. You logically test them for hormones, biological, physiologically. And then if it's true, then fine, you go ahead with the surgery, and then that allowed them to kind of practice the religion better. And you know, like Hanif said, Hanif is right. He said that genders appear, outside. That's kind of true as well. So because it's all in Islam, it's all about intention. So intentionally, if you have the transgender operation, so you can practice Islam better, then that's between you and Allah, and it's, if you can practice Islam better, then that's fine. If you just do for cosmetics, it's a bit
Carl.
Just a little bit of worriness about how you almost seem to, how your message is that the church is just being just going with the flow and going where society wants to take it. Solely because Christianity to many people is the pillar of their life. I think Christian leaders should be leaders in ways, and shouldn't just passively go along with what's saying, but actually lead people to, whether it's especially trans things, that it is okay, and shouldn't just say, well, the people above me say yes, but actually this is what's right, and this is what God would believe.
I'll take 3 more comments, and then I'll let you come back on some of the points. Yeah.
Again. But your point on, I don't know how it is in the Quran, but Christianity means follower of Christ. That's primarily what the religion is about. And Christ was all about love. So from a Christian perspective, the Bible is not, because I think one of Jesus' strongest things that he did was criticizing the Pharisees, who basically everything they did was what was, the commandments that Adam wrote in the tablets and all that kind of stuff. And that was what Jesus challenged. And Jesus was all about love, and Christianity is about being a follower of Christ. So all we can do is but to love. So from a Christian point of view, it's not that we're picking and choosing what we want from the Bible and all of that. No, we're just basically doing what the fundamental of the religion is, which is to be a follower of Christ. And like everybody has said again, all these books are old books. That is the reality. They were written 2,000 years ago. Things have changed. Human society has evolved, and the book has to kind of evolve as well. It would be backwards in a way to not evolve, for the book to not evolve with society. It doesn't make sense. That's just not how people work. People are progressive. Even in the Bible, you can see progress throughout. It just, it just doesn't work like that. And talking about church leaders being the ones to push this change and all of that. I think that's quite a tricky thing to do, because a lot of the church leaders that we're looking at, they're 90 years old. The Pope is about to die or something. They grew up in a completely different era, and I think that's why things like this are extremely important, because we don't know who here is going to be the next minister and is going to be the next pope or the next whatever, and they're already having an open-minded view. So it's about this generation training themselves up to be more open-minded. I come from Nigeria. It's illegal. They just passed a law. If they find out that you're gay, you're going to jail for 14 years. Both of my parents are knights in the Catholic Church and all of that, but I've completely evolved in my thinking. And my mom is extremely homophobic. I could never bring someone gay to my house. She would literally sweep them out the house with a broom. But I've changed. I think just from me shows what dialogue and open-mindedness. My first experience with a gay person, I asked him, I was like, why are you gay? That's so disgusting. That was the first thing I actually said. And I sat down and I was so interested. I really wanted to know why. And from having that conversation, it completely changed. And I think that that's really important. And these kind of forums and these kind of conversations, this is going to affect the next generation of leaders, the next generation of people. And hopefully we won't even have to have this, because, we'll be living in a utopia world as such.
We could finish on that. No, we've got 4 minutes left. I'm just going to take 2 last points on this subject before we open out further. So if we go there and then there last.
I wanted to, from my view, I was going to say a couple of things. First is, from what I've studied of Islam, it's to me, it looks like it's been said those times that there's no compulsion in religion. Second, the Quran is, you say it's the word of God, and
a lot of Muslims they believe that obviously if God knows humans, He's created humans, so He knows what's best for us. And even across societies that feel to the Quran, as opposed to a historical document that changes over time, many Muslims believe that if you look at the actual words, they can be interpreted in such a way that it's for everyone over time. So I understand that point of view, however, it is also, it's a guide for us. It's kind of, in a way, I see it as almost a gift if you believe in Islam, in the sense that you can choose to follow it, and if you do, it's good for you. It's not for, Allah doesn't need us, God doesn't need us. It would be the point that we need Him. So in that sense, why can we not then choose what is from there? I mean, you could say, actually, no, I want to choose everything, because it's all from God. But you have the option, you have the free will to then choose what is good. And in that sense, even in Islam, you should be able to have that choice. You to choose what you follow and what you don't follow.
Well, I'm not saying you shouldn't choose what you follow. That's up to you, of course. At the end of the day, like we all know there's a judgment day, and whatever I do, whatever you do, we're going to be judged for it. I'm not saying that. And as far as I'm concerned, when you keep saying that it's a historical book, I mean, it's a God's book. What do you mean it's historical? God doesn't know that societies are going to evolve? Yeah, God didn't know that at one point we're going to have gay people? I mean, when you say it's a historical book, that's a very dumb thing to say, sorry, with all respect.
Okay.
Because, I mean, sorry, I said with all respect, it's just that.
It's something good.
Okay, right, we need to move on. One other thing.
In reference to what you said, like filter outdated, if you look at the Quran, there are revelations, like, for example, in Surah Rahman, it says that God has placed a barrier between seas. And only recently, right, there's scientists discovered that you have the Indian Ocean, the Mediterranean Ocean, you have different salt concentrations, and there is an actual barrier which stops them. So, in a sense, society is still catching up to the Quran and to Islam at the moment. 1400 years ago, the miracles of the Quran, they were revealed 1400 years ago, and at the moment, society is trying to understand it. They're coming up to the standards of the Quran. In terms of law and in terms of scientific knowledge as well. So the Quran is definitely not outdated. The Quran doesn't need to catch up to people need to catch up to the Quran.
Okay. We've kind of gone into something a lot more broad than the trans issue. I'd just like to ask our panelists for their last thoughts on this subject, please.
I will go touch on the trans subject, but I will go on a slight tangent. I feel like I have to, sorry. But I think it's been really encouraging what people have said in terms of trans issues and how it is very much based on self-determination, and how I think one fundamental thing we have to take is we have to look at how hard it is for trans people in this society. And so for anyone to say, well, you chose this, or you're just trying to be different, or why, can't you just be normal? Yet the question you have to ask is, why would anyone choose to kind of suffer all of that discrimination, not only from the cisgender, which is like non-trans community, but also from within the LGBT community, how much discrimination there can be. And just going back onto interpretation, you were sorry, I don't know, but you were saying how it spells out exactly how to pray. You might pray like this. Some people might pray like this. There's people who know the Quran much better than either of us, who will disagree over how to pray. So it's not easy to say. It says completely how to pray. And even I'm not sure if it's the Quran says it, but it says that there will be 63 denominations of Islam, and only one of them will be right. Now, we don't know which one's right. If we recognise that even God says at one point there will be all of these different views and different viewpoints, we can't know that we are right. Then we should at least open our hearts to everybody else's viewpoints to some extent.
Yeah, I think going back to the transgender issue, I think rather than I wouldn't, in this case, I'd be eager to focus on what I think is the heart of Christianity, is that God showed himself to humanity as a human being. And I think transgender issues are very deeply related to individual people's trying to understand who they are and what they are as a human being. And if they're religious, we're talking about Christians because that's what I know about, if they're Christian, then they want to feel that God, in the person of Jesus, is able to empathise with them as a human being. So I think maybe the Christian message with Jesus as its focus has quite a lot to say to people who are dealing with transgender issues, because it is affirming of their humanity. Now, having said that, we're still arguing about religious books, talking about the Bible and the Quran. I said right at the beginning, there's always going to be an issue with this subject because religious people believe in revelation, and the question is how you deal with that. But I think I wouldn't want to give the impression, and I'm sure our Muslim friends here would say the same. I mean, it's not a question of chucking out the religious books, the Bible and the Quran. No one's saying, oh, we've got to chuck that away and focus on something else. The issue is how we deal with religious books. In what way we use and explore them and find them inspiring. And that's not necessarily going to be one way. And there's once something's down as a written text, people are going to argue about it. That is definite.
Okay, I want to open up the discussion completely broadly now and actually see if we can finally answer this question mark over sexuality and religion.
Can I just ask if anyone would mind a picture being taken of the meeting, just to document some of the really good events that different unions are putting on? If anyone doesn't want to, that's absolutely fine, no problem at all. Does anyone mind? No? Okay, cool. That's fine. That's fine.
Okay, so if we can answer this question, is our religion and personal sexuality mutually exclusive? If they're not, if they are or not, why not? And then, so I want to cover that for the next 10 minutes, and then I want to come back to our panelists for their final summation in the last couple of minutes. Okay, so, and again, our priorities group that haven't spoken yet. Yes, I ignored you earlier, sorry.
I think it goes because then if we exclude it like that, then you can't, from a Christian point of view, you can't let liars into church. You can't let people that steal fornicators. So you can't exactly exclude it because the church is for someone to go to worship. It's between you and your God. It's personal. So I don't see why the two don't go.
Yeah, just right along.
I see them as totally two things that should be taken together. Me personally, I think personal sexuality should have nothing to do with whether they're allowed inside the church or not. Fair enough, it is a personal choice, and we do say religion is the way you should live your life, and you should take whatever book, whether it's the Bible, the Quran, as your way of life. But a person's emotions and the way they feel about another person should not be condemned or looked at as the wrong way, because what is truth? No one actually knows what the truth is. My truth is different to someone else's. Therefore, I don't think someone's sexuality should be taken with what denomination they are. I think they should be treated as two separate things.
I was brought up Methodist, and okay, my faith is a bit questionable, but I think that the way I was brought up, God loves everyone, and just because I want to be with a woman doesn't mean that God doesn't love me still. So I think that's they can go together. I think God's love is for everyone, not just straight people.
Sexuality and religion. Obviously, there's two choices to be incorporated or not. But for example, if we're talking about gay couple adopting a child in Islam, adopting an orphan is we encourage it, and it's such a good deed. And if they do it, we aren't going to if a gay couple comes to me and says if I run an orphanage, hypothetically, and the gay couple comes along, I would say, yeah, sure, go ahead, because it's such a good deed to do, and adopting an orphan is such a big thing. And I would encourage that, because sexuality and religion is between you and God. In Islam, whatever you have inside is between you and Allah, and no one can judge you for that. No one can. So, but obviously, Islam is against the ideology and the practice of homosexuality, not the actual person. If the actual person is gay, we have nothing against the actual person. It's just the ideology and the practice of homosexuality they're against. So in the end, if they obviously they might not be as public. Some gay couples are very public, some aren't. Yeah. So but in the end of the day, it's between you and God. Who am I to judge them? You can incorporate it if you want, you can't. It's up to you. But in Islam, literally, at the end of the day, whatever is between you and Allah, and no one can judge that.
I saw a hand shoot up the back. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, really, like, with this whole debate, I kind of wanted to just differentiate between like persecution and acceptance, because like generally, from my beliefs, and as you said as well, Jesus came to show that he loved everyone, and therefore we should extend that. So it shouldn't be where if someone's like gay, if someone's whatever, that they shouldn't be allowed into the church. But then again, as the lady over there said, that sin is sin is sin. It says in the Bible, sin is sin. And things like lying, cheating, are all sin. With, for instance, being gay, it's seen as a lifestyle of perpetual sin, like living in sin, just like it would be if, I'm saying, like for instance, if you were a prostitute, it's seen as being perpetual sin also. And I'm saying, is it appropriate for instance, Christian authorities and the like to think, say that it's okay? You said Jesus came to empathize, but to be honest, if he just came to just empathize, then there would be no point in him coming in the first place, because he came to change things. And if you just see people the way they are and you say, okay, well, that's fine, I don't really want to do anything about that, does that mean that in turn you're not being the Christian that you're supposed to be? You're supposed to akin everyone to God? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Mine was more of a comment. It's just a reflection really of my time here. I think that if I reached a point in my life where my morality really extends to everything in existence, yet it remains at odds with the morality that God revealed in the book that I wholly believe in, I think it's about time that I do some effort to rediscover that God I'm worshiping.
I think this whole discussion can just be seen as perhaps a coming together of two fundamental human rights, which is your right to worship and your right to practice whichever sexuality you wish.
It seems difficult to reconcile whether it's seen with the Quran or with the Bible that they wouldn't separate the two. That for me as a Christian, it would seem that God's desire is for man and woman to be together in marriage, and that's something that Jesus celebrates and the Bible celebrates. And so, like what this guy said here, there's a massive difference between persecution and acceptance. Persecution is absolutely a problem, but it would seem that God's desire is for family and for man to be together with women. And it seems difficult to argue that as a Christian you would think differently, because the Bible and the Quran and the different religious texts seem so clear, and then to change it would seem, can you pick and choose where you would come from?
I guess this is just towards like religious texts, but surely if God made all people, then surely he made gay people, so why would he kind of frown upon them? I don't really understand that.
You have a question? Go over there.
Just one thing that I wanted to say, and then another thing. One thing is that a lot of people talk about this in terms of behaviour, what you choose to do, whereas I would argue, as someone that's bisexual, is that that's how I was born. Like, that's not, I can't change that any more than I can change my eye colour. So it's completely and totally irrelevant for somebody to say to me, does that fit with your religion? I mean, like, I grew up as a Christian, I grew up being raised as a Christian, and yet I always knew that I was bisexual, and the only thing that seemed like a choice for me was my religion. So it's really sad that I had to, I felt that I had to drop my religion. I felt that I had to choose between the two things, and it's only recently that I've realised that those are both parts of myself. Like, I know that God exists, I can't take that out of me. I can't take my faith out of me. I know about Jesus and I know that in my heart, and I also know who I'm attracted to. And there's just parts of me that it doesn't matter whether they're reconciled or not, that's just parts of me and I seriously cannot change it. And another thing I wanted to say is I wanted to point out, if God wanted men and women to be together, I just don't get this whole gender thing, because it says that God created them in his own image. And I don't think God has one gender. I think God has both genders, and I think that God doesn't, he created men and women in his own image, so surely God has male and female aspects, and it says in Revelations that in heaven they will be neither male or female. And so if that's the ideal in the end, in heaven, where there is no male or female, where it's just about people's spirits, then why is it such an issue here?
I think we tend to try to like overreach and just try to find the answers to everything. Somebody earlier on, I'm not sure who, I think it was even you or something, where you said that at the end of the day, let's just accept everybody who they are and let God judge. So if you are an LGBT and you're practicing Christian or Muslim, I personally, as Ade, cannot say, oh well, you can't have both of them. But if you're religious, you believe that the ultimate person who decides whether what you've done in your life is right and wrong is God. So if you want to live your life as a Christian and an LGBT, you practice both aspects, I can't tell you anything. At the end of the day, the person who's going to decide whether what you've done is in accordance with his instructions is God anyway. So personally, I would say let people live how they want to, and if what they've done is wrong, God will address that and there'll be the correct punishments, and if it's fine, then obviously they'll reap the benefits of living according to God's teaching. But I can't say whether they contradict with each other because it's not me that's going to decide at the end of the day.
Okay, so that's to be the last comments now. Yeah.
I just wanted to say more of a comment that I really enjoyed today's debate and discussion, and I thank the LGBT Society for us deciding to come along. I have found it found it very interesting, and I also found it quite difficult to say anything in particular because I don't know, I'd say the philosophy of that kind of Eastern faith is a long one, and I'll be rambling for hours and hours about the way, I mean, because obviously it's just the way I believe I am, like in Sikhism it says that, and it might sound a bit of a crazy idea, but for me it's like that we all are God, that's our ultimate identity, and because of that, that basis on the way we see things. In terms of what Sikhs believe, you'd get a lot of old Indian men saying, no, definitely will not be gay. I can appreciate that, but as me myself, I'm completely open to the whole concept of it, and I apologise for not actually getting into the discussion as much as I could have. Yeah, thank you all for all things today.
Perfect note to end on. I'd just like to ask our panellists to have a maximum 2-minute summation on their standpoint and their reflections. So if you start, Steve.
Okay. I think it's worth pointing out that both in Christianity and Islam, and you can say the same about Judaism, these are religions that have a very good and enduring tradition of quite strong ethical teaching, and people find that teaching attractive because it's a way of ordering family life, ordering society, etc. We've got to remind everyone at this point that when religions talk about sins, it's not always about sex. There are other things that human beings need to think carefully about, like being fair, caring for the poor, being kind, not gossiping, all those kinds of things. So we shouldn't think sin and sex, it's all one and the same thing as far as religion is concerned, because there's a lot of other stuff as well. Anyway, these traditions, these religions that have this strong ethical side to them are very, very important to society, and we're not saying you've got to chuck all that out. I would simply say, from in a sense, an enlightened and scientifically informed viewpoint, which we all have now, we have to look a little bit more carefully about some of the things and not just assume it's all a question of things that are non-negotiable. And as I said, for Christians, it's not about a book, it's about Jesus, ultimately. Now, how you work that out, that's a matter for you, but for Christians, it's about Jesus.
Yeah, I think for me, it's not a matter of, I think all the kind of philosophical, theological debate is really, really interesting. But for me personally, it's not about whether I can or you can reconcile homosexuality and faith. For me, if I look at the Bible or Quran, I don't know much about other religions, I can't reconcile what the two say, and that's one of the reasons I'm not a religious person. But as someone said, what my truth is different to somebody else's truth, and I don't think that my truth should be universal for everybody else. And so for me personally, if I see that it helps for an LGBT person, a student that I'm there to represent, for them, if they will grow as a student, as a person, to embrace their faith, to live their truth, then I'm really happy to facilitate that. And equally, I'm not going to expect someone who thinks that it can't be reconciled to kind of say, oh well, you know, we're going to pretend that our faith isn't true to us. But what I'm going to say is that you shouldn't step in the way of that person living their truth, because we all have our different paths. Sounds a bit cheesy, but we do, and there's no reason that either one of us should stop people from getting to the end of their journey in life.
Thank you. Just before we all back up and go, I think it would be great if we could show our gratitude, first of all, to the panellists, but also to the two people that actually made tonight possible, which are Meg and John, who run the lastly, I'd just like to thank all of you for coming. It's been a very interesting night. It's probably been the best debate I've ever chaired. It's been one of the most diverse audience I've ever had the pleasure of chairing, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I've just got one point. I'd like to thank Matt, and I did make a major fail. And I would like to also welcome and thank the LGBT Society. And I forgot a crucial part there, but sorry guys. But yeah, also thanks to Matt and everybody for attending. It has been really interesting. And at the start, I thought we were all going to leave with everyone being fun.